Hello, one and all. We are back for another episode of Teams Like Brighton, and I'm delighted to be joined by George Smith, who is making a bit of Teams Like Brighton history because he's the first guest to appear thrice on our show. So, George, thank you so much. Namaste. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Rich. I'm very well. I feel honoured that I've been able to complete a hat trick on teams like Brighton. I feel very proud that you've chosen me to come back again.
Well, I mean, we liked you so much the first two times we thought we have to complete the hat trick. So, yes, let's crack on. Obviously, the big match is coming up on Thursday, Brighton versus Manchester United. They played each other less than 2 weeks ago in not the most exciting FA Cup semi-final, but a gripping contest in the end nonetheless. Before we sort of talk about the upcoming match, what were your main sort of takeaways from that FA Cup semi-final win for United?
Well, I think, as you said, it wasn't exactly the most vibrant of memorable games, was it? It was quite a dull affair for the most part. And I think we reached the stage when we got into extra time, we all probably thought, is this ever going to end? Neither team really did enough to win it in normal time. I thought Brighton looked the better of the two teams, to be fair. I thought they fashioned the better of the chances. Obviously, at the start of the second half, they had quite a rally on David De Gea's goal, which they just couldn't quite punish United for. And after United weathered that little storm, they did get their act together a little bit. But I thought it was a very even game. I didn't think there was much between the two teams. Like you said, it was a game really deprived of quality. It was probably, the worst game that we've seen from those two teams between themselves. And, recent meetings, certainly, obviously, we saw the 4-0 Brighton win at the end of last season, the 2-1 win at the very beginning of this. And it was a bit cagey, this one. I think United had learnt lessons from the past. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I thought, did an excellent job. Mitoma, he handled him really, really well, nullified that threat. McAllister didn't, in my opinion, run the show quite like he has so often this season. And obviously United managed to, keep Brighton contained, took it all the way to penalties and got the job done, which the shootout, like the game itself, we thought, was it ever going to end? And we did get there in the end. Obviously, neither keeper making a single save. And unfortunately with Solly March, it was him that missed, which allowed Victor Lindelof to score the winner, which he did. So a disappointing result for Brighton, of course. For Manchester United, a really good result. Not the most memorable games of Eric Ten Hag's tenure, not by any stretch. Nevertheless, he got the job done. He's guided them to an FA Cup final for the first time since 2018. And obviously, it's an all Manchester affair, which will be really interesting. How, though, Rich, from your perspective, from the Brighton angle, how did you see that game?
Yeah, so I guess it was probably because these opportunities don't come along very often for Brighton. Obviously, the last time and the only time that Brighton have reached the FA Cup final was back in 1983, which was way before you and I were born. So it's these opportunities don't come along too often. They may come, it might be London buses, hopefully, for Brighton in the not so distant future. But I do feel that because Manchester United, I'd say, weren't at their best, did have injuries. I thought Brighton, I agree, I think they were the better team. And I think this was a slight missed opportunity to really put United away. There was just a few too many, not so much rabbit in the headlights displays, but just sort of, white line fever. They just couldn't quite find that the important pass or have that coolness in the box, or just kind of pull the trigger at the right time. And like you say, Wan-Bissaka, one of the very few players who did a number, who's done a number on Mitoma this year. I'm really intrigued to see if that matchup happens again at the Amex. I would like to see that, and I think, because Mitoma basically said he waved the white flag at the end. He said that was a defeat on my part. So I think he will definitely be chomping at the bit to try to avenge that loss. But yeah, I'd say missed opportunity. Brighton, I think that game also showed how there is a big contrast in sort of strength and depth. So I saw that Simon Jordan was taking the mick out of United, saying, they have 500 million on the pitch and then 200 million on the bench to bring on. Contrast with Brighton, they had, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, that sort of thing. They only used 2 substitutes, whereas Manchester United used, I think, 5. And then for Brighton, there was a proper, FA Cup hangover a few days later when they got beaten against Nottingham Forest. They ran out of puff as that game wore on. But then this would segue to the next bit. So, George, how have United been since that FA Cup win over Brighton in the league?
Well, obviously they responded with a game at Tottenham a few days later, back in London again last Thursday night with a trip to Spurs. And for the first half, they were seemingly coasting on the way to 3 points. They were 2-0 up by half time. The first half display was arguably one of the best that they'd put together away from home so far this season. And of course, you've got to include the caveat that Tottenham have been struggling of late. But United, as they have so often not done this season, they've failed to put teams to the sword when in command of games. And Tottenham came back in the second half, as of course you will have known, and they got a 2-2 draw out of it, which at half time you just could not have predicted, could not have foreseen that coming. United were exposed far too much down their right-hand side, which funnily enough did actually lead to Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Anthony both being dropped for the game against Aston Villa on Sunday, which I'm sure we'll talk about more a little later on with potential changes for the game with Brighton on Thursday night. But they got the point at Spurs, which obviously felt like a defeat in the circumstance. It was another game where United, playing away from home against the top half team, failed to win. I don't know if you're aware of how bad Man United's away record has been this season against top half teams, in the sense that they've only beaten Fulham of the current top 10 away from home all season. They've not beaten anybody of the current top 8, which could potentially stand in Brighton's favour on Tuesday night. This is kind of Thursday night, I should say. This is feeling like a almost last chance saloon for Manchester United on Thursday to kind of bury this demon that has been plaguing them all season, which is their last away game against a top 8 team this season. And as I say, they've not beaten one of them. So there is a real problem that has plagued Erik ten Hag's team this season in that sense. But as I said, since the Tottenham draw, they beat Aston Villa on Sunday, which was a very, even though the scoreline didn't suggest it, it was very much a controlling victory, just by a 1-0-0. It doesn't look particularly glamorous on paper, but it was a really good performance from Ten Hag's team, a good response to that setback at Spurs. They were strong, very good going forward, should have scored 2 or 3 more. Defensively, very, very astute. Again, they've now got 15 clean sheets in the Premier League this season, which is the most of anybody, which is probably quite a surprising stat considering when you look back at the 7-0 defeat at Liverpool, 6-0 defeat at Man City, the 4-0 battering at Brentford. Aside from those games, they've been pretty solid defensively this year. And that's with a patched up back four because, at the moment, Rafael Varane, Lisandro Martinez, United's two-star centre-halves are still sidelined with injury. Erik ten Hag said this lunchtime that Varane is on the comeback trail, but tomorrow night will come far too soon for him. Martinez is out for the season. So we've seen in the last few games since the Brighton FA Cup semi-final where Victor Lindelof and Luke Shaw have lined up as a centre-half pairing alongside each other, and it has worked to perfection. They've bounced off each other really well. Lindelof, he's almost resurrected his United career within 3 games. He's leapfrogged Harry Maguire in the pecking order now, so Maguire is now considered 4th choice centre-back once Varane and Martinez fit as well. So
what a bargain.
He's really, yeah, certainly is. He's really lost his way, but Luke Shaw's been superb. But as I mentioned there, with Wan-Bissaka and Anthony both been exposed in that second half at Tottenham on Thursday night, Erik ten Hag decided to drop them both against Aston Villa on Sunday. He admitted that it was both down to squad management, which is understandable with the volume of games United have played this season. They've played a hell of a lot, obviously being in the Europa League up until recently, the FA Cup all the way, the League Cup all the way. So those two were dropped on Sunday, which meant Diogo Dalot played at right back and Bruno Fernandes played on the right wing. Whether that will change or remain the same on Thursday night, I'm not convinced. I think Wan-Bissaka, having dealt with Matoma so well, will come back into the team, which could mean Dalot goes back across to left back. And I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony came in for his threat on the counter-attack with the pace. Obviously, Rich, you can put me in the picture about Brighton's dominant victory over Wolves on Saturday, which was quite extraordinary, really. And probably all the more impressive that quite a few of their star players were on the bench from the beginning, including both Mitoma and McAllister, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, that was... hindsight is a wonderful thing. And I would say that maybe they should have made the changes after the United game for Forest. But De Zerbi said because he felt that there was sort of an injustice that Brighton lost that game, he thought there would still be enough sort of fire in the belly and I guess energy levels for the players that lost to United to go again for Forest. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And then he rang the changes. I think it was 5 or something like that for Wolves. And like you say, Caicedo wasn't playing, Matoma wasn't playing, McAllister wasn't playing, and Billy Gilmour, that was his first Premier League start since early February. De Zerbi said that Gilmour was the best player on the pitch. And yeah, before they brought on their big guns, they were 4-0 up. It was just an incredible performance. It was they were just brilliant right from the off. They outfought Wolves from basically in every facet of the game. It was a fantastic display from them. They show that they do have a bit more strength and depth, and De Zerbi did actually admit that he has made mistakes in not giving the likes of Gilmour and Dennis Undav, who's bagged his first Premier League goals of the season in a brace against Wolves. He didn't give them more game time to maybe allow them to have a bit more confidence. So, yeah, it was a joy to watch. They now have, obviously, after a shorter turnaround, they have a little bit more of a break for this game, and I think they'll be so up for it. Brighton have showed a couple of times this season that when they have not so much a point to prove, but when they're sort of extra motivated, they really can do a number on team. And the prime example was when Graham Potter came back to the Amex after leaving Brighton for Chelsea, and then Brighton blew them away in a 4-1 win back in October. I don't think that will be the case today, but on Thursday. But I do feel that this could be a different story this time out. I do think Brighton could win this one. But I just wanted to ask about the point you made about the struggles against the top teams away from home. Why do you think that is? Do you think they sort of set up differently, or how do you sort of explain it?
I think it's a really difficult one to put your finger on, because United this season, everybody's aware of what happened, say, away at Manchester City back in October. They're aware of that 7-0 stuffing at Liverpool. They're aware of what happened at Brentford a week after the Brighton game on the opening day of the season. Everybody, has seen the funny side to that. They've seen what happened. But United overall this season have made enormous progress under Eric Ten Hag. If you think back to last season, and it's almost a year to the day since they were beaten 4-0 at the Amex last year. I think it was the 7th of May last year under Ralph Rangnick. They were an absolute mess. They were a club in crisis mode, to be quite honest with you, which, teams towards the bottom of the Football League pyramid would say Manchester United in crisis mode. They've not really got a clue what that means, which you can fully understand. But for a club of Manchester United's stature, last season was a shambles from top to bottom. But Eric Ten Hag's come in, and as I said to yourself before, a couple of weeks ago, he's introduced standards and he's reset standards, and bumps in the road every now and again, and that has happened this season, let's be honest. But at Old Trafford, they've been almost faultless. They've not lost there in the Premier League since that defeat to Brighton on the opening day. They've only lost one game since then in all competitions at Old Trafford, and that was in September, the night that the Queen died, where obviously it was a very subdued atmosphere, and that game probably shouldn't have even gone ahead. But away from home, going back to your original point, it has been a mystery to why they have been so poor against top-par teams away from home this season. And I'm just glancing at the Premier League table now and looking at the results they've had against these teams. Arsenal away, they lost 3-2, 6-3 at Manchester City, 2-0 at Newcastle, and today they lost 2-0 at Newcastle. That was probably one of the worst performances they produced. They were so flat and lifeless. They were stuffed 7 by Liverpool, 2-2 draw at Spurs last week, beaten 3-1 by Villa. So, they've taken 1 point away from home against the current top 7. So it's a really bizarre one, because United, as I said, have made tremendous strides this year, but they have a habit of, when the going gets tough away from home, they tend to capitulate. They press the self-destruct button and they fall apart. We saw it only 2-3 weeks ago when they lost to Sevilla in the Europa League away from home. They were a complete shambles that night when they lost 3-0. So it's really kind of difficult to understand what exactly is the direct cause of this. It's almost a sense of when they go into an away game now where the team they're playing might, be capable of beating them and, competing with them stride for stride. They just seem to be able to press that self-destruct button and fall apart. And as I said earlier on, tomorrow night's game at the Amex is United's last chance to beat a top half team away from home this season as the table currently stands. So it is an opportunity for them to try and just throw down a bit of a gauntlet ahead of next season. But I think personally, Brighton head into this game as favourites on Thursday night because of that away record of Manchester United's. And obviously Brighton are going to be full of confidence after that victory at the weekend. And like you said, they're going to welcome back 2 or 3 of their main men who are going to be up for it. De Zerbi, obviously, as we've been discussing off air this morning, we don't really know if he's going to be there tomorrow night due to this illness. But if he is, he's going to be up for it. We've seen what sort of passionate character he is. And of course, United have not beaten Brighton any of the last 3 outside of a penalty shootout. So Brighton do seem to have got a bit of a hold on United at the minute. And I personally would honestly say, I think if Man United were to win this game on Thursday night, it could be one of their best results of the season because this is going to be a really hard challenge for Erik ten Hag and his players.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to ask, so just from a Brighton perspective, they are struggling a little bit with injuries. Evan Ferguson has been out for a couple of games, and they're also without Adam Lallana. Tarrant Lamptey looks like he's out for the season. Jeremy Sarmiento's a young winger who's had a metatarsal injury, and he's also sidelined. Jakob Moder's a long-term absentee, but and Joel Veltman also. Sorry, he picked up he came off, I think, with a hamstring issue against Wolves at the weekend. So just for United, you touched upon the centre-backs, Martinez and Varane. Are there any other key absentees for United for this game?
There are a handful that they've been battling against for a while, and obviously Varane and Martinez are the main 2 that they've been without for the best part of the month nearly now. They've been sidelined since that first leg against Sevilla. Alejandro Garnacho, he's been out since mid-March with a serious injury. He's on the comeback trail, but Erik ten Hag, speaking only this lunchtime, suggested that this game will come too soon for him. Didn't rule him out for certain, but I think there is they're going to play on the side of caution with him and not risk anything too much. Because obviously they've still got some big games to come in the next few weeks, and of course they've got the FA Cup final to look ahead to as well. Elsewhere, Scott McTominay, there's a chance he could return. He's missed the last 5-6 games, something like that, and he's been quite good in the last few games that he's actually featured in. He's chipped in with a few important goals. He had a good spell on international duty with Scotland. So that's really where United are at. Varane, Martinez, the big ones, the main absentees. There might be 1 or 2 sort of squad players that are missing, but they've got no issues elsewhere, really. Marcus Rashford's back fighting fit now. Bruno Fernandes, he's shaken off that problem he had against Brighton at Wembley when he came off. He's started the last 2 since then. Even then, he's not been able to restrict himself to not playing. He's that passionate. He just wants to be on the pitch all the time. And elsewhere, Casemiro's got over his suspension issues. Christian Eriksen's back at full tilt. So United will be in a pretty good, strong place on Thursday night. But I think the biggest thing to look out for when that team is announced at 7:00 on Thursday evening will be who starts in that right back position. I think there's a lot of intrigue whether Aaron Wan-Bissaka returns for the Mitoma battle or Diogo Dalot continues as he did on Sunday. But considering Wan-Bissaka was rested at the weekend, I would think he will come back in because, to be fair to him, he's probably been one of United's best players since the World Cup break, which is quite staggering to say. He only played 4 minutes worth of football before the World Cup, so he's really resurrected his United career. So He's probably the one to look at. But in terms of main absentees, beyond Varane and Martinez, there's no what you call star names missing for this one.
And final one, obviously, we've spoken a little bit about it. What is your score prediction for the game at the Amex?
You put me on the spot again. Well, I got it wrong for the FA Cup semi-final, didn't I? This time, as I said, I fancy Brighton. I really do. United's ability to implode away from home against the better sides this season, it is a problem that needs addressing. And whether that's going to be something they can look at during the summer, who knows? I think it's more of a mentality issue rather than footballing ability problem. So I'm going to back Brighton on this one, and I think they'll win this game, and I'm going to go for a 2-0 Seagulls victory.
Oof, convincing. Yeah, I think Brighton will get over the line, but I think it will be a 2-1 home win, which should make the race for all the European spots even more exciting. But yes, George, thanks so much for coming on for the free Pete. Cheers for giving us your time. Just want to wrap up by saying where people can find your work and your social media channels.
Yeah, you can find me on the MEN website, George Smith, on the Manchester News, and on Twitter you can find me at _George Smith 99.
Great. Well, thanks so much, guys, and keep on liking and subscribing and listening to episodes of Teams Like Brighton.